Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to talk about, are we living in the end times related to this concept of NESARA? Coming right up. So, are we living in the end times? Yes and no. Now, I need to go to this biblically, okay? Hey, if we're talking about Buddhism or anything else, all discussions are off. We're talking about biblical end times. When people claim to me, we're living in the end times, we're in the tribulation. No, we are not. Now, are we in the end times? Now, I have a video called The Birth Pangs, which you need to watch if you're not familiar with this. Excuse me. But we are not in the tribulation. Now, the end times actually, in Paul's standpoint, through the Gospels and Timothy, we see this over and over again in different ways. We're in the church age. Now, when the church age ends, which is dispensationalism, and I say that, and a whole bunch of people are just going to type in there, "You're a false prophet." Sorry, that is actually biblical in this way. When the church age ends of the bride of Christ, and we move into the next phase, that's the tribulation, and it starts with the Antichrist. Now, some people want to talk about Antichrist system and they want to bring up all this other stuff. And I'm like, guys, you're missing the point. Now, we have been through ugly points. We feel like they're tribulation. And I always say to you, if you think this is how bad we are with what we've dealt with through 2020 and 2021, this is how bad the real tribulation is. And you go, I cannot imagine that. I understand that. It doesn't mean that it's not going to get exponentially worse in the tribulation. But we're not in the tribulation. Now, when we deal with this corruption through the military kind of thing, when the military deals with the corruption that's happening, and the elitist, these government officials, some people have said as many as 95% of the government should be in jail in different ways. Okay, and I would definitely agree with that based upon constitutional law. When we look at the media, who have been lying and complicit in the lie, actually pushing the lie, that is just as bad. And they push their own narrative that is supporting them. I mean, and they're in lockstep with one another. And then you've got Hollywood on the other side pushing their own narratives. And that's why it freaks out this idiot administration that wants to say when some woman comes out with an idea that, the vax isn't really the answer, they freak out because here's someone in those three lockstep point that are going against the official narrative. And the reality is, NESARA, National Economic Stabilization and Reformation Act, is a portion of this, isn't just the money changeover, is dealing with the corruption. The corruption that happens, and we find this in the 14th Amendment in the 3rd and the 4th section of this. It sets up the executive orders of 13848 and 13818. Those executive orders came really close to one another, and they were fully related to NESARA and a lot of the election fraud. And as we look into those kinds of areas, we're saying, how isn't this the tribulation? And I say, no, the tribulation's so much worse. How can you say that? Because Jesus introduces the tribulation. How am I saying that? And if you've watched my channel before, you know that I'm going to talk about this. We as the bride of Christ, are in heaven. In Revelation 4:1. John is transported into heaven and he sees a sea of glass of people in front of him. That's you and I. And we're in that sea of glass. And there's a lot of conversation going back and forth in heaven. There's a Bema Seat judgment, which is not a judgment, it's more of a rewards banquet. And then we move into this conversation about someone opening up the seals. And if you've listened to me talk about this before, everyone supposedly gets up in line and they're trying to open up these 7 seals, which introduce the tribulation. And then John drops down in a puddle of tears, freaking out because no one can open up the seals. He says that no one under the earth, no one in the earth, and no one in heaven can actually do it. And the angel standing there, dude, the Lamb who was slain before the foundation of the earth, the Lamb is worthy to open up the seals. And who is he talking about? He's talking about Jesus. Jesus opens up the first seal, which introduces the Antichrist. There's a guy named Chuck Missler who died, unfortunately, about 3 years ago. He has a gorgeous teaching. If you ever go back and watch it, he's on his YouTube channel. And he goes through a very perfect way of explaining it. And I also do this in my Hope in the Last Day series. But the reality is, that's the introduction. And Jesus is the introducer of the Antichrist. And that is the reason why we go into the tribulation, which is Daniel 9:27. So you're saying, what are you talking about? How does this relate to NESARA? We're not in the beginning of the tribulation. We're not in any of those kinds of things. This corruption of this government, I want to share with you something that has been kind of playing in the back of my mind. It's been bothering me for years and years and years that I could never really explain. Here's the idea that the church has pushed out. And frankly, I've been a part of it too. So I'm telling you in the past, I haven't spoken this on the YouTube channel, but I have thought of this and I've said this just in passing. I've never really taught this, but I'm responsible for my own information. So I'm sharing with you a new insight that I'm kind of getting. Catch me here. We think as prophecy teachers that Jesus is as the time frame comes, that Jesus is going to return, the tribulation, and to his eventual stepping on the planet. Stepping on the planet. We think that the enemy with the elitists are going to have been rising up and rising up and rising up, including along with the UN and the EU and all these different organizations, that this group of people are going to transport a one guy into the position. He's going to be pushed out of that. And this is a very common overall teaching. And I say to you, that is so opposite of what they hope for. I'm not talking about what we hope for. First off, the Bible doesn't even talk about this. It doesn't talk about a group will promote a guy who will be the Antichrist. And so it never says that. And then other people want to say, well, this group is the Antichrist spirit. Well, guess what? No, it has to be a guy. So we have knocked out both of those things. And here's what happens. Here's what the NESARA agreement does with killing out the corruption. When it does that, it's going to knock out these elitists. And when it knocks the elitists out, it actually cleans the slate. It's like you have a whole bunch of writing on the board. You're a teacher, and you've written on the board, and you have a whole bunch of crud, and you walk in the classroom, and you're like, what are they trying to say there? If you've ever done that, I've done it before. I walk in the classroom and think, I have no idea what they're talking about. And yet, you don't have perspective upon this. And yet, I believe that what we're seeing is this full-out knockout of these elitists, I won't say the word because I get in trouble if I say that. The elitists, we're going to knock them out. And then Jesus is going to not promote, but introduce the Antichrist down the road. It sets itself up perfectly for the day that the Antichrist shows up. So this corruption thing is actually an introduction of a killing off this part of the evil, so that the new evil will be introduced down the road. You say, well, how long is that going to take? I don't know, a few years. I'm not really worried about the number. You could say it could take 5 years, maybe. Could it take 10 years? Maybe. I don't really care. Why don't I care? Because God didn't tell anyone in the church when it's going to be. Therefore, he doesn't think that we need to know that information. And then I say, well, then I'm not going to worry about it. You see, when you get in your own mind about the things that you need to control, God's going, I didn't ask you to control that. I mean, it's like you go to work for a company. I remember doing this years and years ago. I go to work for a company, and I thought I needed to go in there and tell everyone what to do, and I was a young idiot. And I walked in there and told everyone what to do, and then they were rebelling against the stuff that I was talking about. Because I just thought I was trying to make everything in the image that I believed it needed to be. And the company was like, listen, we don't need you to do that. We don't want you to do that. In essence, that's exactly what Jesus is saying to the prophecy teachers. He's going, listen, I have control of this thing. You don't get to manipulate it. You don't get to change it up. If you want to talk about what biblical prophecy says, it'll be a guy introduced to begin the tribulation, and that introduction is done by Jesus, meaning that he has control of it. And how that sets up this portion of this phase that we're seeing in late 2021 is that we're going to see this corruption go away. And we're going to see a time frame of really good kind of abilities, because the gospel is going to go throughout the world, and we're going to see some real improvement of people around the planet. But because he wants to bring more people to him, and that is something I want to be a part of. So that's the portion that we want to talk about today. We were talking about, are we living in the end times? And the answer is yes, in essence, because we're in the church age, but we're not there yet. We're not biblically there yet. And I trust in the Bible. Do you?